let us subscribe to the YouTube channel and stay tuned for all the information as we are going to start preparing for all the videos like I told you guys. Okay, so look for tutorial sheet 2. That's what we're looking for right now. You can search in the videos for tutorial sheet 1 that has already been solved. Okay, so let us try to start with question 1 in tutorial sheet 2. This is macroeconomics. Okay, so question tutorial sheet 2 had question 1 which reads A. So they told us, or they were saying, according to the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, the real GDP of the United States for the first quarter was 2017, using constant 2019 dollars. So it means that we're using the same dollars from 2009 to 2017. Okay, was 16.9 trillion. So this means that, so this is what we had as our real GDP. Okay, what was being produced. So this is basically the production that was being produced in the economy in the US. Okay, the question further goes on by saying the total expenditure was 17.7 trillion. Okay, so in the economy, the government might have been, the government or any other, okay, so we know that total expenditure is going to be calculated using aggregate demand, which is, okay, we have consumer, households consumption, we have investments, we also have government expenditure. Okay, this is an open economy. And then as well, we have the net exports. Okay, so of course, we're simply talking about this. So the total expenditure that was there is 17.5 trillion. Okay, so the question goes on by asking us to say, what might be the reason underlining a difference between expenditure and production? Okay, so what you have to understand is that there are so many reasons that might cause GDP, real GDP, to differ from the expenditure that is being spent, or the amount that is being spent on the goods and services that were produced in an economy. Oh, so those reasons, like I've mentioned, there are a lot of reasons that you can give, and some of those reasons can be timing, timing in selling, or timing in consumption. So you might find that the time that the economy is going to produce whatever goods that it is producing will be different from the time that those goods are going to be consumed by consumers, government, and any other sectors. Okay, you can as well talk about miscalculation. You're going to find that when they're calculating GDP, real GDP, it's not all the time that those firms, it's not all the time that those firms are going to tell the government to say, okay, for sure, my production was maybe 42. Meanwhile, they might hide some of it. So you find that there will be miscalculation in the expenditure. You can look up on more reasons why you can find it different, but those can be the main reasons, or an idea on how you understand those causes, or what can cause a difference in expenditure and production in an economy. Okay, question B. Question B was saying, how is the level of economic activities calculated using the income method? So here we're simply trying, or the question is simply trying to ask you to say, how do you calculate income using the income method? Okay, so this is simply income being calculated using the income excel. Let me say GDP. Okay, GDP is being calculated using the income expenditure. How do you calculate the activities that are being produced? Of course, you know that okay, so income expenditure, or income accounting, national income accounting, is simply measured using three methods. There is one for income, method, the other one is expenditure, which is here, and the other one is value added. So you have to understand these three methods and how you calculate GDP using these three, because once you understand these, you're going to have no issue of understanding any other things that are in front there. Okay, so now if you're calculating GDP using the income method, you're simply going to, or you're going to need to know what we mean when we say income method, or what we mean when we say adding incomes. Okay, so adding income will simply, it will mean that we're going to add all the incomes that are earned by the factors of production. Okay, so we're going to add all the incomes that might be earned by the factors of production. When what we mean by the factors of production, we're simply talking about um, labor, we're simply talking about capital, we're simply talking about um, interest rates, we're also talking about entrepreneurship. Okay, so you're going to find that by adding all these, you are simply going to find the same answer as using the value added and the expenditure expenditure added method when you're calculating GDP using those um, formulas. Okay, so GDP is simply, or when you're using these methods, these three methods, you're supposed to find the answer to be the same. Okay, the answer should be the same because they simply are the methods that you're still going to use to calculate the same thing, which is GDP. Okay, we move on to two. Two will simply mean that they're saying that how is GDP calculated using the expenditure-based accounting? So GDP is going to be calculated using C, which is consumption by households, plus investments by firms, plus government expenditure. Government can spend. How does government spend, or how is this government expenditure? Um, we're simply talking about that amount that the government is going to use to build roads and all those things. That's the government expenditure. Okay, roads, infrastructure, hospitals, schools, all those things. Okay, we can as well add net exports if it is an open economy. If it is a closed economy, we do not add this. But since this is an open economy, we're adding net exports. Okay, we move on. D says, how is production based accounting used to estimate GDP? Discuss the role of value added. So like I was saying, the value added method or approach is going to as well help us calculate GDP in the same manner as the income and the expenditure method is going to. So the same value that you're going to get here is the same value that you're going to get there as well. That's the same value that you have to get there. Okay, here you simply add only the value of those final goods that were sold either to consumers or maybe you exported the goods. Okay, but we're simply talking about the value of the final goods only. So the value added does not include immediate goods, intermediate goods, because intermediate goods are going to simply cause a double counting if GDP adds that value. Okay, if we add in the value of the intermediate goods, it will mean that we'll be double counting. Example, if a let's say a farmer sells wheat to those guys that grind wheat into flour, and then those guys do so and sell flour as a finished product. You cannot add the value of the wheat that was sold. Let's say wheat was sold at 20 kwacha, and then we say the value of flour was sold at 60 kwacha. You cannot say this plus that and you say 80 and that's your GDP. No, you're going to say we subtract the intermediate, and then the value that we're only going to count is one. When we subtract this, we're going to get which is what, 40. So our GDP is supposed to be 40, not 80. Okay, so that is how GDP is going to be calculated using the expenditure method, using the income method, and as well the value added. Now, how is the value added value, what role does it play in an economy. So you're going to find that this basically tells us how much or what the economy basically is producing, or the capacity of the economy. It is going to tell us to say, okay, the economy is producing at this rate, and the capacity is this. Remember, we have the potential production in an economy, but we are not simply going there, just not to confuse you. You just have to understand to say, the value added will tell us to say, okay, now the economy is producing at this point, and since it is producing at that point, we're going to have this much. Okay, since it is removing the double counting part, it does not include intermediate goods. Okay, we move on. So our E is saying differentiate between GDP and at basic prices and GDP at market prices. So you're going to find that GDP at basic prices is simply measured using we subtract taxes from there. So you're going to find this is simply the amount that producers or producers, those people that produce goods and services, are going to get after whatever they produced. So it means that that money excludes the taxes, which are indirect taxes. Okay, so this is simply measured as GDP at basic price is equals to GDP at market price minus the taxes plus the subsidies. So we are going to find that if a firm is the one producing, we add subsidies, but we subtract what? Taxes. And then if we're calculating GDP at market price, we subtract subsidies, but we add taxes, because GDP at market price is simply the GDP that is measured using the actual amount that a consumer pays the producer for the goods and services that they produce and those consumers consume. Okay, so that is how we differentiate those two, and that is the simple thing that we can try to memorize and understand. Okay, moving on to F. F is simply saying differentiate between GDP and GDP. So you have to understand that GDP as the gross, the way we have G here, GDP stands for gross domestic product. We have G in front here. So this G stands for gross, and that gross means that we are adding depreciation. What is depreciation? Depreciation is simply the value of a good that a fixed good, a fixed capital good that was bought. So let me give an example. If you buy a car, or let me say if you buy something, of course you buy maybe okay, let me say a car at 20,000. I'm just giving an example. Let me just say 200. Okay, and then let's say this amount, if you use a car, that car will depreciate. It won't be new as it was before anyone used it. So that amount, the value that you've used that car is what we're calling depreciation. So if this car was worth 220, when you bought it, it will decrease maybe to 215. So depreciation can simply be 5 as the value that you've used from that car. So now GDP, when we're calculating GDP, we actually include the depreciation. We do not remove depreciation, because GDP is going to calculate all the value of the final goods. So we do not remove the depreciation. You also have to note that GDP calculates the value of all the final goods, but it does not exclude to say, okay, when these goods were being produced, though the machines were used, so the depreciation of those machines is still added to GDP. So it does not tell us to say, okay, this is the actual thing that was produced in the economy. Now, for us to notice, okay, now, since we're removing depreciation, we go to net. Whenever you see net domestic product, we're simply removing depreciation, which means that we're going to tell ourselves to say, okay, now since the country was producing this much, so the value that was added, the value that was actually added to the economy is this much. If we use this, since we're going to subtract depreciation to this GDP that we have. So to find this, we simply just subtract GDP minus depreciation, we find the net depreciation. If we are going to find GDP from net domestic product, we are going to add depreciation to this and we find GDP. Okay, I hope that has made sense. Let us move on. And G is saying differentiate between GDP and GNP. So GDP, we have said that it measures the value of all the final goods in the economy. Okay, so it means that it measures the value of all the goods that are produced inside an economy or country. So inside here in the boundaries of this, okay, geographically inside in here, it does not it does not matter to say it is a foreigner that is producing, or a Zambian, let's say we're talking about Zambia. So a Zambian is producing here. No, GDP is going to calculate all the value of all the goods and services that are produced in that area. It includes um, the resources for even foreigners. It does not exclude. As long as something is being produced in Zambia, GDP is going to calculate it, part of it. Okay, then GNP simply calculates the value, the income. Okay, so the income that is produced by the residents of a certain country. So if we say a Zambian stays in China, and then let's say that person owns something there, that income that will be coming from China will be added as GNP, because that is part of Zambia, but it is national. Okay, so GNP is simply gross national product, which means that the value of all the national goods, okay, national goods, and of course the domestic goods. Okay, so we're going to continue in the next video. We're going to do question H and we continue from here. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, share the video with your friends as we continue to prepare for ourselves for the exam and everything that we prepared in. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.